We're going to have a great debate. We've already had half of it up here, I've got to tell you. Does financial literacy really make us financially well? Just before I introduce the panel, I'm going to ask you to complete a polling question. So you need to pull out your phone, which will no doubt be on silent, and look at the live Q&A section of the app. And we are in Forum 1B, and there's the question. Is financially educating members part of your member engagement strategy, yes or no? That's a great question, isn't it? Is financially educating your members part of your member engagement strategy? All right, and while we wait for everybody to respond to that, let me introduce the members of the panel. Roslyn Russell is with me, research professor at RMIT. Please make her very welcome. Bit of enthusiasm. She's got some great research on financial capabilities and financial well-being in Australia. She's been at that for more than 15 years, and she has a particular interest in the financial well-being of women. So she's going to have a little presentation for us to begin with, and then she'll sit back down and we'll have a panel discussion, which will also include Effie Zahos, the editor of Money Magazine, Bauer Media. Please make Effie very welcome. And Lisa Summers is a Senior Specialist Stakeholder Engagement and Partnerships at ASIC. Please welcome Lisa. And Lisa's also done some research that has really informed and evolved ASIC's own approach to fostering financial wellness. So let's have a look. Oh, there we are. 91% of you are educating your members as part of your member engagement strategy, and only 9% aren't. And in fact, my industry super fund has just sent me an email today inviting me along to, I could tell you if I could find my phone.
To a conference.
Invest in yourself, it's saying. Come along, women in super, investment, come and talk about, yes. But of course, I don't have time. So we'll do it here instead. Roslyn, if you would like to go to the podium and make your initial presentation.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and it's really exciting to be at an industry conference. It's much more lively and exciting than some of the academic ones that I'm subjected to. So thank you. Let me begin by telling you some very important information that could affect your well-being. Alcohol is a drug and a poison. We now know that there is no safe level of alcohol consumption. Now, before you start wondering whether we're at Gwingana Health Retreat or rehab, and instead we're at a superannuation conference, just bear with me. What will you do with this knowledge? I won't ask for a show of hands in case it doesn't prove my point. But for illustration purposes, I'm guessing from this sample, there'll be a range of reactions or non-actions. So what will happen? I reckon most of you will forget this probably by the end of the session. Some of you may feel a little bit alarmed, and you might remember it when you're having a glass at the cocktail party tonight. Most will continue to consume the same amount as you always have. Maybe for some, the information may have come at the right time. It's a sign, and it might trigger some further research, an inquiry, or a conversation. But even fewer, or perhaps none, will actually act straight away and stop consuming alcohol. So there we have the power of knowledge. And knowledge is actually impotent without action. It may lay dormant, and that's the difficult thing with financial literacy and financial education efforts. It's very difficult to know what effect it's had on people, when and what they've done, because it could happen now, it could happen in the future. It's very difficult to measure. So we've actually spent a lot of time in the last couple of years trying to understand financial well-being, which is where we've come from financial literacy. So 10 to 15 years ago, we were talking about financial literacy, which really is about knowledge and consuming knowledge only. We talked about capabilities, which is a big part of financial well-being, but now we have this umbrella financial well-being, or wellness, which is far more holistic and actually speaks more to what we're trying to achieve. So there's been a lot of international research and national research about what financial well-being means to Australians and how we measure it. So basically, it comes down to, and with all the research, it's very similar what they've come up with, the components. So basically, it's 3 components. If you have financial well-being, you can meet your everyday expenses. You can feel comfortable enough to make some choices and enjoy life. And you can have resilience for the future. So it sounds very simple, doesn't it? However, that simple overarching framework, those simple components, they include many layers of complexity, which actually make it a little bit more difficult to encourage financial well-being, because we have to understand a lot more factors. So we can actually have different scores for each of the components, and we can have an average score of overall financial well-being. So that's been in the last 1 or 2 years, and that's actually made a big difference to our research and being able to generally assess where people are in their financial well-being status. So the most important contributing variables to financial wellness or financial well-being are the social and economic environments. And this has been a really big, it's been a very big step in our understanding, because the financial literacy dialogue and conversations, it sort of ignored the environmental factors, which we all knew was wrong. We knew that there's a lot of other factors. So now, formally, for the first time, we actually can include economic and social environments to the financial wellbeing framework. And not only that, those factors are the most heavily weighted. So having a stable income is really important to financial well-being. Having social support, social connections, that also contributes to financial well-being. So some interesting factors have been brought to light, which I think should be, I should make you aware of. And one factor was actually receiving parental advice when you grew up about financial knowledge and capabilities. So isn't that interesting? How you talk about money at home actually makes a difference to your child's future financial well-being. And a lot of the research I've done, even with women and with other cohorts, the financial socialisation has actually made a big part in predicting and affecting their behaviours as an adult. So just keep that in mind when you're role modelling good financial behaviour at home. Capabilities and behaviours play a much bigger role than financial knowledge. Capabilities are developed through learning by doing, practice, experience, and it's not just knowing that savings are important, we all know that, but knowing how to set a financial goal that will work for you, knowing what savings account will be best for you, and then allocating money to put into that savings account. That's what will make the difference. That's the action, not just the knowledge. So the most important behaviours actually in financial wellbeing in the research that we're now aware of is actually saving. If you have a saving behaviour, you have far more points towards financial wellbeing than someone who's in the identical situation as you and doesn't save. So saving and not borrowing for everyday expenses are the two behaviours that we've isolated that actually make a difference to financial wellbeing. Other important factors are individuals' attitudes, motivations, and biases. Having an internal locus of control is really important. So knowing that you can affect your outcome is an important difference between those who have high levels of financial wellbeing and those who don't. Self-belief and confidence in your capabilities to manage your money. And again, you can see how that comes from financial socialisation and being brought up with money conversations. Low levels of impulsivity are all linked to financial wellbeing. So one interesting factor is time orientation, and I think personally this has actually a big bearing on different people's mindsets and attitudes. So the different time orientation that we might have, there are some people who dwell on the past, just think about their mistakes all the time, ruminate, and that's where their orientation is. There are others who think about the future all the time. They're planning, even forsaking sort of, living for today, really. And I'm guessing that because we're at a superannuation conference, there's a lot of future orientation going on here, actually, in the room, which is a good thing. The future orientation is quite good. So if we actually are unbalanced in our time orientation, that will actually affect our financial well-being. Living for today is the one that worries me the most, is the one we get so many consumer messages about this. Live for today, don't worry about tomorrow. And it's about how do we as consumers and juggle all these mixed messages. Put super away, put money into your super, no, live for today. I mean, these messages are so, tell us different things. And so it is difficult as for an everyday person to sort of combat those overwhelming messages that we hear. We were just talking about the buy now, pay later. I mean, that whole premise of buy now, pay later is actually built on living for today. And that business is growing exponentially. So being too heavily skewed on any of those perspectives will actually thwart our attempts at achieving financial well-being. So when we hold particular mindsets or set of beliefs, so future orientation people here, it is difficult for us to understand that other people may have a different mindset to us, and these mindsets are what drive how we operate our lives. So we need to think about what the members' time orientation are with your super funds. So you might be scratching your collective heads wondering, why people, especially women, aren't putting away every spare dollar they have into their superannuation account, because that's what you would do. You're future-oriented. So do you know that the time orientation held by your members? What are their goals? And what do they want for themselves and their families? What are the attitudes and beliefs that are proving problematic to them achieving financial well-being? And what are the environmental factors that are shaping their financial lives? So how do we fare as Australians? So there's been an Australian study done on financial well-being. We score 59 out of 100, which is all right. We score pretty well in meeting day-to-day expenses, not so well in feeling comfortable enough to have spare money, and also less in resilience for the future. So I'm sure that probably doesn't surprise you, actually. So what would I do if I was interested in financial well-being or wellness of your members? I'd find out about their lives, their context, find out how they fare in terms of their financial well-being. What areas do they do well? Where do they need support? And ask them what barriers they are experiencing to actioning the knowledge that you provide for them. Find out what they need in order to place the behaviours and the attitudes and the capabilities that will actually make a difference to their financial well-being. And that's been a big part of the research. We've actually isolated behaviours that are more important than others. So instead of flogging a certain set of behaviours that aren't really going to make that much difference, we now know the behaviours that will make the most difference to financial well-being. And that's been a really important step in our research. So just to connect the dots with my introduction, knowing that alcohol is a poison, it's probably not going to change your behaviour at the cocktail party tonight. And giving your members more information, no matter how important you think it is probably not on its own going to change the behaviour of your members. So the financial education programs that may work are ones that are action-oriented with supported knowledge and action. Programs that help people get the skills they need to have financial well-being, and are the ones that are more useful. So the skills that they need at a certain time in their life are important. Tailored support will help, and this is what we're missing in Australia and actually much of the Western world. We don't have tailored financial guidance. It's financial advisors, financial counselling, but for everyday people, unbiased, trustworthy financial guidance is really quite a big gap that we don't support here. So most importantly, though, we need the environmental conditioning and the norms to change that will actually help facilitate or nudge the effective financial behaviour. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And please have the questions come through. I've got the iPad here. I'm seeing there's 2 questions sitting there from Brad and Anonymous, who was in the other one as well, Anonymous. So keep those questions coming through. That's terrific. That was wonderful. Roslyn, I'm interested, Effie, if that corresponds with your experience as well, that notion that you can, in a sense, lead a horse to water. Mm-hmm. You can provide all the financial planning you like, and often we'll hear politicians talk about this. All we need to do is we need to stuff more into the school curriculum around financial literacy, and there we go. And in fact, in the video that began our whole conference, there was a young man saying, maybe you should teach me this stuff at school. Most people can't calculate 10% of a given number. So where's the balance?
It's interesting you should say that. So I found interesting 91% of the response was that there is financial literacy that you're giving out to your customer base. Yet, as Roslyn was saying in her reports, 59 of 100, if my kids came home with that report, I would not be happy. And when you look at the Hilda survey, you saw not only how financial literacy is nowhere near where we think it is. We may think we're pushing out all this information, we're doing a great job. But if you've had a chance to go through that test, 5 simple questions on diversification, inflation, asset class, and so on, and you're saying, can you calculate? One question was, I've got $100 in a bank account, no fees, earning 2%. How much will I have at the end of the year? Now, only about 38% of women got those 5 questions right. Almost 50% of men got those 5 questions right.
So what was it again? Women were 38.
38. So there is a financial literacy gap. Why do we have low marks on both genders? And why is there a gap when we are pushing out so much information? Exactly like you were saying, Roslyn, that connection with it. I kind of wear 2 hats. One as the editor of a finance magazine, been doing that for 20 years. So obviously people are paying to get that information. They're pretty savvy. And I can say this, if I did a superannuation cover 5 years ago, it would not have sold. Right now, I know if I do a super cover, it's going to be my best-selling issue.
Because?
They're savvy. They get the information and they're using it. But having said that, we're sitting in this room, we've all got great jobs, we're getting paid, and that's not where mainstream Aussies are sitting. When you look at those surveys like Hilda, what's happening out there is that we have a long way to go. And I think where the important part that I stand with is that money, there's more to money than dollars and cents. It is more on the behavioural side. And if we don't start getting behavioural economics right, what's going to happen for consumers, because I'm really sitting here as a consumer, industries are going to get the better of us. Some are doing a damn good job on playing on behavioural economics and the likes of, round up accounts, investing into ETFs without even thinking. I think they're great. I've got my 18-year-old onto that. Is it the best way to do it? Not, but it's a great way to actually start investing without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
Some bad examples, as Roslyn said, I'm not a fan of buy now, pay later. Yes, it is the cheapest. It's cheaper than a credit card. There's no interest so long as you pay it off in time.
But also you don't have to, they're not bound by the Credit Act.
Yeah. And
they don't have to assess whether or not the person can pay it back.
Yeah, so it's not about the product being cheap. It's about behavioural economics. I mean, I was researching that story for my own purpose of the magazine.
It's hard to get your head around.
I almost bought a jacket. I almost bought a jacket in my research, and I just thought, this is powerful.
Well, I just kept going back to the researcher going, you must have that wrong. ASIC must be doing something about this, Lisa. That's not your hat. I won't make you answer that. But talk to me about your research, Lisa, because you've got some great practical examples of the obstacles to financial wellness.
Yeah, absolutely. And so perhaps just sort of calling out that ASIC has a financial capability branch and team, and we talk about ourselves as being part of the regulatory toolkit. So ASIC is a lead Australian government agency for financial capability, and we've called out those 3 behaviours: managing money day to day, making informed decisions, and planning and saving for the future, that we not want just ourselves, but all of the stakeholders and organisations involved part of. And that sort of domestic and international research that Ros has mentioned, we've really drawn from that. We want Australians to be in control of their financial lives, so that's really important. And of course, ASIC has a service delivery role in financial capability. We have an Indigenous outreach team. We have our Money Smart site. 7 million Australians visited that site last year. You'll probably guess, well, maybe not guess, is exactly what you were sort of saying. 2 million Australians visited our superannuation content or our superannuation calculator last year is up 20%. There's a ferocious appetite for this stuff.
And at the same time, they were all shifting out of which,
Absolutely.
may or may not be a good idea. If you're 60 years old and you've got insurances in a retail super fund, that may not be a great idea, but nevertheless.
Yeah. And we have a teaching program. So we know that financial literacy and capability is embedded in the curriculum. ASIC was able to do that in 2015, working with our states and territories to do that. My team at the moment, based on international domestic best practice, is now actually doing some outreach work into schools. exactly what sort of Ros has sort of spoken about. This isn't necessarily just about teaching kids about knowledge and skills and the wonderfulness of compound interest, but it's actually going in, speaking to the entire community. What's the teachers' financial wellbeing? What are the parents' financial wellbeing? What's their understanding of all these things? What do kids want to know? We had this fabulous guy in one of the sessions who said, please don't tell me that I can't buy a fishing rod, because the fishing rod is the most important thing to me. It helps my mental well-being. And I think this is a thing...
Does he already own a fishing rod? Is this like the 5th fishing rod? I have some experience of this.
It could be.
Yeah. I think he already owns a fishing rod.
But I think this is a thing for all of us to kind of grapple with and hear, that financial well-being is intrinsically linked with a person's mental and social well-being, and we can't disconnect those things.
That's interesting. Ros, I talk a lot to Jane Caro, who I think is at this conference as well, who has sort of been banging the desk saying a man is not a financial plan. Do you see generation, like that 38%, if we were to look at that 38%, is there a generational difference when you look at women and their financial literacy or their sense that they need to be engaged with their financial
well-being? There is a difference, and it's quite surprising. From 40 to 59, women are the most vulnerable. They have the lowest sense of self-efficacy, financial self-efficacy, and the younger ones are better in many respects in terms of their confidence. But when that family stage happens, something happens to their brains, and everything starts to shift. And that also coincides, not coincidentally, with maybe taking caring leave, a maternity leave, and all of a sudden they're not in control of any money. They lose their self-confidence, and that's also a time of economic abuse that can slip into the relationship. So it's sort of a U-shape, and then it gets to the older women where they're quite content with having very little. So it's the 40 to 59 is the most vulnerable ages that we found in our Big Women and Money study. Younger women, you'd hope that having superannuation right from day dot, they are set to be better, but I'm still surprised, and I don't know if you know this here, but 30% of people don't have any superannuation, adults in Australia. 30 have zero. 30%.
Yeah.
How can that happen? And I also worry about the gig economy and where I know I work at a uni and all the uni students are working 3 to 4 jobs, probably getting no superannuation from any of them. And it's taking 5 years for them to get into their chosen career. So what's going to happen to this generation? And I am worried that while we've made some inroads, it's all going to fall away without the protection of regulation with the superannuation in small businesses and in the hospitality industry and where all the places where young people work.
Yeah, living wage and secure work. When Effie, the government, it could just as easily be a coalition policy, it happens not to be, says, maybe we need to have a look at negative gearing. People are opposed to it even if they don't own an investment property because they imagine that they could. So that is part of what Australians imagine that they could do. They could own a little shack somewhere, regardless of whether they ever will or not. Is there that, you were saying about the cover of the super, put super on the cover. Do they have that same sense of engagement with their super that it's part of their dream, it's part of their birthright, it's part of what's possible? Do they have that sense of building a nest egg around it, or is it just there, maybe somewhere, I don't know where it is?
So I see, I have two hats. I've got those that are really engaged with their super, and then I also talk to those that are not. I think the Royal Commission, what that has done is really shed light on engaging people that they must engage with their super, and we are getting a lot more interest. When you look at ASIC, which is a free website, and you're getting that many hits, and you look at what I do, and people have to pay for that to get it. There is people, when you look at what scares people the most, the number one thing is retirement. have I got enough to retire? I know it's my greatest fear. I always say I don't want to retire in a polyester outfit and drink cask wine. I do have alcohol.
That's okay. You're not drinking any wine at all.
No, not drinking any wine.
Established that.
So
Put it in my super.
I think the engagement is definitely there. But having said that, with women or with any situation, a lot of people also think, you know what, it keeps changing. I don't have enough in there, and they don't actually see super as their bank account.
Yeah.
And I can tell you this: when a consumer has, say, $1,000 in their bank account and $20 comes out as a fee, they're on the bank straight away. What is this fee? I'm not paying it. Yet, if they looked at their statements and saw what fees are coming out with their super, if only they did that, then they would cross that line and realise that this is our bank account. It is here. But I genuinely believe, and I'm so happy that consumers...
The shift is happening.
The shift is happening.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see, as you already mentioned too, the dollars flying out, I guess, of retail, going to industry for whatever that is. People are starting to panic. Sometimes panic can give some bad moves, but if they get engaged, then we're doing, I feel like we're going in the right direction.
Yeah. Lisa, do you think we should stop doing financial literacy the way we've been doing it, which is just, if I tell you often enough, surely I will get through to you?
Yes, absolutely. For everything that Ros has just sort of said, so we know that knowledge and skills alone is not going to cut it. We know that when we're doing financial capability or financial wellbeing interventions, that we have to look at attitudes and values and behaviours and look at the person in their context. So I think a great there's so many great examples of that across sort of the network. But if I take a look at sort of what the First Nations people did, and also ASIC did an outreach, 2-week outreach last year with a lot of people in this room, our government partners and NGOs. We went out and did an Indigenous outreach for 2 weeks.
And what did you say?
Wrap around, and the things that they sort of uncovered when they did that outreach. And sometimes it's going to be having to do that face-to-face outreach type of work for really vulnerable customers.
Along the lines of what? What do you value? What do you imagine? What does your future look like? That kind of thing?
Yeah, and just basic things like, people not having ID so they can't communicate with their superannuation fund appropriately, people having multiple accounts, and the impact that outreach had on, and what we heard this morning from First Nations was just significant. $3 million was able to sort of get reunited with people. So absolutely, our interventions, and I would encourage everyone in the room, you need to be doing a review of your financial education work with this kind of knowledge and lens.
Let's go to some of the questions here. Roslyn, do you think as Australians we tend to downplay our net wealth, in turn leading to a sense of pessimism about the future?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
And you could add to that, the notion that millennials are screwed. Every time they open the newspaper it says, you are screwed. Eat the avocado. Just forget it.
Forget about home ownership. Oh, look, I'm not sure if why you would downplay it. And again, the research that I do has been around with women a lot and sort of lower income consumers, I suppose, and they would love the opportunity to downplay their net wealth. And so I'm not sure about that. I think that they are afraid of not having enough to retire on, and I think that's it's a reality, because that's what we hear in the media, and I think that they're wondering what's going to happen to them when they do retire, and I think they'll wish they did. I think they would like the opportunity to play down the net wealth. So it's not in my experience, no, that they would do that.
But it's an interesting one. We were talking offline about a colleague of mine who thinks that she can't afford property, and the one thing that a single woman in her mid-30s, protects you from the ravages of whatever can happen to you in old age is if you own somewhere to live. We all know that.
Yes, that's right.
And so it's that intersection between I don't have any money and the educational piece, which is I come from a long line of chartered accountants. Look here,
Yes,
you do. Look.
Yeah.
So where, how do those fit together? Do you know what I mean? How do you break through one when it looks like it's a literacy thing,
but it's not.
But at the same time, it's an attitude piece.
It's a tailored support situation is what will help your colleague, and what being able to step them through that and get them to take the step. That's the tailored support that she needs. She doesn't need more information from the website or anything. She just needs someone who can assure her that that might be okay.
Yeah.
Women especially have such low levels of confidence, and also a fear of debt, a fear of not being able to pay it back. Sometimes there's a hatred of money. There's a lot of deep-seated stuff that goes on with money. It's not in a vacuum. So yeah, it's the attitudes, and that's what needs fixing or needs supporting, rather than the literacy issue.
This is a good one for you, Effie. How do you explain the success of the barefoot investor when it comes to financial literacy and engaging with so many people successfully? So many people have given me that book. Nothing would induce me to read that book. What's wrong with me?
You've not read it?
No.
No.
I mean, imagine you would read a novel. You read a novel.
He's written it really well.
Has he?
I know, to be honest, look, I haven't read it. The reason why I've just written my own book, and I made a conscious decision not to read it,
so you did,
because I just didn't want it to influence me. I know Scott, and he's written for us a few times and so on. What he said is not new. I mean, I've kind of been mentored by Paul Clitheroe, so it's not new, but it's how he says it.
How
and he
is
does
that?
a
Because
brilliant...
it's cult-like. When they press it into your hand, you must
and it
read
has.
this.
I mean, I think he sold 1.5 million books. And you know,
I've got 3 of them.
Do you know what? When I wrote one, my brother gave me one for Christmas. I go, "You're kidding? I just wrote my own book. Why didn't
You must read this book.
And it's funny, when I first realised it was a cult, I was at my son's soccer game, and this woman came up to me, who is a lawyer, and her husband is a fund manager, and she said, "Look, I've just bought Scott's book," and I just went, "Oh, God, why don't you buy mine?" I said, "Why did you buy a finance book? Aren't you a lawyer? You know, you must be over, $500,000 so on." She goes, "I just don't know where my money goes." And mind you, this was Saturday morning, dressed from head to toe in Chanel, and she drove off in a Porsche SUV. I said, I think I know. Yeah, I think I know. It's a communication.
It's the empowerment piece.
It's going back to what we were trying to say here. I think Scott does it beautifully. It's just a conversation. It's not about you must talk about compound interest or anything in that case. It is just some common sense, a chit chat, getting together with some friends as you would talk about sport, football, whatever the case may be. We're talking money, but you actually don't even realise you're talking money.
Yeah.
And he went that one step further, and actually, I guess, whether you like it or not, told people where to put their money. So, in a sense.
It's practical. He gives some practical
It's a recipe.
steps. So, I mean, while financial education might say, now, you'll get a better deal if you ring up your insurance company, but Scott will actually tell you what to say. And a lot of the consumers that I deal with, they need that script because they don't feel empowered. They don't feel like they have the capabilities to talk to a big institution. So having that script, and if you don't get any joy with that person, you ask you ask for your manager. So it's a recipe, and it's great, and that's what consumers need. So it's practical.
That's very good. That's very interesting.
He's embedded it into people's life and what's already going on in their lives, like date nights and all sorts of stuff.
There's another question here. Research indicates women have higher levels of emotional intelligence. Is there a relationship between emotional intelligence and financial literacy?
Can I answer that one? Thank you. Yes, we did a big study with women and money, and what was the overall theme was that financial lives are embedded in women's emotional lives. We ran a lot of focus groups as well as a big survey, and everything that they talked about money, we'd ask a money question, they would talk about emotions and family relationships. It was embedded, and if you try to separate them, then that's your first mistake. So you need to look at those things together, and it is emotional. We didn't do a men's study, so I don't know if men are just as emotional about money or not. But for women, it is emotional, and it is about family. It's about relationships. It's about it holds a lot of baggage is such a negative word, but it holds a lot. Money is not in a vacuum. So yes, it is very much an emotional part of their life.
I remember remember having this, I was a social worker at Centrelink for 10 years. And
Really?
So I used to have lots of conversations with people about all sorts of different things. But I remember this one young guy who was 18 that came in and, we were sort of talking, and it was, he was just about to get sort of $330 a fortnight and lots of complex psychosocial issues, someone that had really just had a really hard life. And he started talking to me about, that he wanted a wife. And I want to have children. So all those things, Ros, that you're sort of saying, I know in the context for women, but I imagine these things are just as important for men. And we were able to have this great conversation and intervention that really kind of centred around, wives cost money, and so do children, and going on holidays. And, he wanted to send his kids to schools that he didn't go to. And it's like, I think that's the kind of things that you were sort of saying, Ros, beforehand too. Yeah. That's where we need to start.
Women know that they need to put more money into their superannuation. They know they're behind in that regard, but ask them, are they going to do that instead of putting food on the table or paying for the uniforms or paying for the school trip? No, they're not. And, that's just how it is. You have to accept it and you have to deal with it. By trying to make them do anything different, it's like you're beating your head against a brick
But it does
wall.
come at a cost. I mean, that whole thing, put your oxygen mask on first before you give it to your children.
Yeah.
I mean, I find in the research I've done is that women will more often spend more on their kids than should be at their own cost of their own retirement plans.
Yeah.
And there's a related question. How do we convince retiring members that their super is their comfortable retirement, i.e. to spend it and not to leave it all for their kids?
I'm going to have no problem spending it.
No, I think it is a generational issue. I cannot persuade my mother that I really am fine. I'm 52 years old and I reckon I'm all right. And that, if she wants to.
In our survey with women of all ages, we expected that the caring for family, we measured the priorities for women and their financial goals, and even women into their older age, their older cohorts, it was still their major priority was caring for family, and some of their biggest regrets are not being able to have enough in order to help out their family more, whether it's their grandkids or their grown-up children. So it's ongoing, and
but it's also fear of not knowing, interest rates are at record low, we're not getting a good return. How long am I going to live for? Am I going to get sick? Or, it's that not understanding how to work out their drawdown stage. And there's not a lot that's said on that. So we talk about accumulation all the time, up, but not much is said as far as, drawing it down and drawing it down effectively.
There's a question here about the fear factor, whether there's an automatic triggering of fear when you start to talk about it. Like that email I got, it said, it's quite good. I should do it. Join an ever-growing circle of financially empowered women. Take time out for you. Attend a free seminar. That'd be a good thing to do. But part of it induces in me the sense of,
overwhelmed.
I know I don't have enough. I know this is going to be bad.
I know.
Do I really want to?
Well, that's the thing, and the sector sort of wondering why women aren't engaged with their super. I mean, if you knew you had $2,000 in your superannuation account, would you rush home in order to open up the statement and just make sure you're going to be poor when you're older? Like, it's just going to confirm the things that you are trying not to think about. And if your future is grim, why do you want to ram it down, on a daily basis?
At the same time, if you have, I don't know, $100,000 and you're going to be a pensioner, that's a good amount of money, isn't it? And so you're not having to survive on the old age pension. You have a little buffer. So I guess it's a different way of thinking too about how you can live with the investments that you do have.
And that's a really good point, because I find with a lot of people that we always go on and on, you need 655k in super, you need this. Well, let's stop and listen. There are people right now that are about to retire today, tomorrow, next week. They just don't have that. And once they realise, hold it, I can actually live an okay life in the sense of that sweet spot between the pension and super. And for some of us, I have to be honest, there's no point trying to even go over the threshold, because you lose your $3 for every 1,000. You're better playing the game in the sense of getting that sweet spot and getting a nice income, rather than scaring the bejeevers out of people that you're not going to have a great retirement.
There's a really good point that circles back to this afterpay and all the rest of it. And you were talking in the beginning, Ros, about living for today is the thing that scares you the most. Do you feel the perfect lives in Instagram have increased expectations on what women can afford? Back in the 80s, buying an affordable shack was accepted.
Yeah, for sure. Like we're in a different era now than 20 years ago, and it does it for younger women especially. I presume it's mostly younger. It's a big part of their life, and I do worry about that. And if it's not measuring up, if it's not having the same as what's in your Instagram and what they're wearing, your life will be deficient. So,
well, I'm sorry to be negative, and particularly even to talk with this horrible voice, but so it's kind of like eating healthily. You've got Healthy Happy Harold. Everyone know Healthy Happy Harold?
Yeah, the giraffe.
And he's up against, or she, who knows? No, Harold is he. He's up against like Coca-Cola, all the sugary snacks, all the sugary cereals, all the things that food scientists have worked out exactly how to make it smell and look and whatever. Aren't these people the same? They've got a financial literacy message out there against the whole consumerist thing. I mean, they're not advertising for the hell of it. They're advertising to change behaviour. So is it a kind of an uphill battle, really?
Well, unless we can counteract it with that same level of investment and that same level of will, we need to shift the consumer norms. Yes, that's the main thing that needs to happen, and if that's the biggest square in the financial wellbeing framework. So if we can shift that, that will make a much bigger difference than trying individually to change little habits here and there, because that'll be a collective change. When saving is normalised, when talking about your super at the girls' night with the wine, when that's normalised, I mean, that will help. It will help. And
but also recognising, you're saying social media, that is one of the triggers to spending.
Yes.
Recognise, actually, Pinterest is the number one culprit when it comes to spending. You get on there, you see these great pictures, and you just think, yep, I need another cushion for my bed. That's exactly what I need. It influences you to spend. Know that is a trigger, then put in a reaction to it. Turn it off. Don't associate yourself with it. The same of, sales, fear of missing out, you were saying. Online, millennials, all of us are online, and they're flashing one left, 70% off. That is a trigger to spend. Yeah. Flip it over. You're not actually saving, you've got to spend it. And I think once you realise what is it that triggers you to do a behaviour, then you put, your action plan in place to avoid it. Yeah. I mean, in a lot of cases for me, it's like I have a rule, I will sleep on it and not come back. I'll come back to it tomorrow morning. If it's still there, it's mine.
I think a lot of these channels can be a force for good too, and I'm sure you would sort of say this, Effie. I mean, Money Smart, we have, Facebook and all that sort of stuff. We're just about to launch our own Instagram sort of stuff because we know that that's where people are, and I think that's the important thing for us all to sort of be thinking about is where are people going to get the messages and make decisions, and this is part of where they're going. And last year we trialled this sort of 8-week savings challenge, and I know that you did a savings challenge, Effie, at the same time, and the majority of people that came onto our 8-week savings challenge, because we sort of recognised that one of those important things was that 20% of Australians don't have a savings buffer, and sometimes that is because of income inadequacy, but sometimes it's just because people just haven't committed to that priority. So we set up an 8-week savings challenge to kind of bring people on, and most of it was women coming on board with that. And we had some great outcomes. Some people didn't love it, but it was kind of mirroring some of those things like, Sam Wood's 28 thing and all that sort of stuff. Did you experience the same?
It was like a savings buddy. And that's why I guess when you have a running club or a buddy for whatever, it's no different to having a savings buddy. And that doesn't mean you've got to divulge all your secrets that, I earn this amount or whatever. You can still keep that personal, but you can have someone, hey, Lisa, I'm trying to save for this. I saw this. Can you help me out with it? It's just something to talk about. And you can get competitive.
Yeah, totally.
When you look at the FIRE movement, these are people that have got budgeting down, they're saving 60 to 70% of their income. So I've seen these people open their wardrobe and there's only 5 shirts in there because that's all they need.
This is the FIRE movement.
Financial independence, retire early. And
really?
They're the extreme. I unfortunately called them a cult, and I didn't mean it in a bad way because they are but they all work together. A buddy group. They're online, they're sharing, they're posting, they're proud. They are proud of their financial status.
Ross, do you think members of industry funds have more confidence in their funds following the Royal Commission, Or, according to this question, are we kidding ourselves?
No, I think you do. I think you should. I think that's a valid feeling to have confidence in the industry funds. So no, I think that's a very fair thought. But don't be complacent. So no, I think that's a fair one, and I think that the trust is far more deserved in industry funds than the retail.
Going back to the beginning, David asks, functional literacy is so high right now. How big is the disconnect between how we communicate with members and their levels of financial literacy? Is that a risk, that you're making an assumption about where people are?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But can I pose the alternative? Aren't I entitled to say, well, I do work, and I have worked for a long time, and I've put 9% away as required, and my fund is doing okay for me. Why do I have to engage with it?
Yeah, exactly.
I've made that decision.
I think that's where we need to sort of be, and I think that why do you expect people to be engaged in it on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis? Why? It is, and part of the problem is that it is intangible. And a study we did quite a few years ago, actually the people actually didn't even think it was their money. They thought it was employers, and so they were completely disengaged with it because they didn't think it was their money. If it went into your account, then went back out, it might be, it might be more meaningful, but people don't.
How frustrating is that? It's on your statement. This is what you earn, this much tax you pay, this
I know, they might not even take
we
any
have
notice.
to be engaged.
Yeah.
We have to be engaged.
That's not hugely engaged.
No, that's just
I
knowing
believe you have to be hugely engaged because I agree with Effie. Even more so now, may I say, and industry funds as well. I think the next move there is what happens with such a trillion, economy, and it's a honeypot, and I think we have a long way to go to make it even more friendlier for consumers. The amount of rigmarole that goes from moving from job to job, the papers that have got to be done. For goodness sake, I mean, it's easier moving your energy supplier than it is with your superannuation. Yeah. It's so convoluted. It's not talking clearly to consumers. We've got a long way to go, and consumers should be engaged. They should be looking at that more than they're looking at property prices.
Do they know what it means to be engaged? I'm not sure if people know. What does that mean? Does that mean looking at your statement every week, or does it mean actively moving stuff around in your statement? I don't know what that means for consumers to be engaged.
Yeah, what do they want me to think about?
Yeah, exactly.
Because if it's not a personal,
women don't know.
If it's not a personal consultation about me and my particular needs and then.
And this is where we probably can do better. We're obviously looking at performance over 5 years. We're looking at what asset class you're in. Maybe you need to look at that.
But again, why do I have to look at that? If I'm in a balanced fund and it's a good returning industry super fund, why do I have to go?
Because the difference between a dud fund can be like from 4% in a balanced fund that's got even balance isn't balance. It's kind of like, I might be a size 8 in Country Road, but a 14 in another store. A balanced fund is so different. And depending on what stage you are, what the markets are doing. I'm not saying we should be trading and changing all the time, but just have a better understanding.
Yeah, totally. And because life happens, this is the reality for a lot of people. This thing is going to be their biggest asset, and particularly for people coming up, and if they're not owning homes. There's people can run into health issues. 1 in 2 of us are going to get divorced, and we know that I've got a bug that wants to hang out with me. For women, it takes 6 or 7 or more years to then kind of regroup after a divorce financially. Life happens. You have to be engaged with your long-term stuff.
A 4% return versus an 8.9% return over 10 years on a balance fund. You've got fees that range from say 2 to 4. You have to be engaged.
Couple of questions here. Effie, as a parent, what do you think super funds should be doing to help prepare and educate teenagers on super, and how do you engage them? Can I answer? I said, please. I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. I wouldn't worry about the 12-year-old just at the moment. He's not engaged with anything. But I said to the 14-year-old, the thing about compound interest, would you give me this and then would you give me 10% more the next day and then the 10% more, like on a grain of sand? Would you move that grain of sand for me? Of course I'd move a grain of sand for you. Now 10% the next day. And then within a very short order, he's moving tons of sand. And I was kind of going, do you understand the relationship between numbers? Do you understand compound interest? Of course I do. What's the difference? And, actually doing the sum, and it's, as Einstein said, it's a miracle, right? It's kind of a miracle. And was in the office telling the newest member of staff about compound interest and superannuation the other day, and I heard one of the other girls say to her afterwards, "She gave you the talk." Right? This was the talk. I love it. I don't know whether the talk
Did it change
helps.
behaviour? Did it?
I don't know, but I just wonder whether or not information, listening to you all talk, whether or not information is a trigger for later behaviours. So we've all seen the ad like that, right? Everybody saw the ad like that. And then they watched the Royal Commission for 6 months, and then 11% of people moved their funds, and they knew where to move them. Or they knew where they wanted to move them, right? They wanted to move them into industry super
They knew they
funds.
wanted to move it out that one.
But they weren't they weren't ringing the electorate office of the local federal member saying, "I want it back." Right? So I wonder whether or not the talk helps in the end.
Oh, look, I think it does. And information, action probably won't happen without knowledge, but knowledge on its own is not effective. So it can be the start of it, like a seed, and then it might be, coupled with a couple of other things, will be enough to make action one day. We just don't know when.
Well, they
That's
took
the
a Royal
trouble.
Commission to move that 11% we're talking about. That took people going on the stand and giving horrific stories.
It's hard to miss.
Look,
But that was fear too. And we talked about fear being immobilising.
I think
well, that's not immobilising if 20% more people are on your website and 11% of people are moving there. So, what's your answer to the teenager question?
with super?
talk about retirement.
So my daughter had a very bad experience to start off with super. So set up a super account. This was pre the insurance being opting in. Sorry, she's obviously under 18. She lost all the money. She came running out of the room. I've lost all my money in super on fees. But look. Is she engaged still at this stage? No, not really. She understands the importance and thinks, Mum keeps banging on about it all the time. She's probably a lot more savvy in the sense of fear. I always instill fear. I feel that works with my kids. But look, she's a uni student now, and even though she's left home, she's still financially dependent on me. Conversations with her all the time, but still not there 100%.
Yeah. I think the thing is, when we've been going in and talking to year 11 and 12 students about this very thing, you can't go in and be talking about retirement or anything to do with old age or anything like that. There's just like a disconnect with all of that sort of stuff.
Right.
So I was about to say, we're also looking at a situation where people coming through are probably not, a lot of them are going to be self-employed. They're going to be influencers or whatever they may be. And super just doesn't work for them. So if I get an answer back from my daughter, well, I don't think I'm going to be working like you have, Mum, in the same job for 20 years and working for someone else. So then, does super work for her in that sense?
Yeah. Okay, one last question here. So the government is on its third edition of financial capability and it's still failing. The question is here, thoughts on why? I think we've probably canvassed that. But should those sorts of efforts be abandoned in favour of something else?
So if I can...
It's yours, Lisa.
I mean, absolutely not. I mean, I wouldn't say that they're failing. We have made huge gains, and the fact that Effie's cover, she puts super on it now, gets more attention. The fact that, superannuation, I don't think it's a failing. I think actually we have made heaps of gains. There's absolute more to do. But no, I don't think we should be absolutely not abandoning financial capability. Yeah.
I think that was a wonderful session. Please thank the panellists very much.